Erick 877-973-7425. I decided, Sundays is my routine day to finish off everything in the afternoon after church, although I can't wait for Easter to be able to set foot in the church again. That's our goal as a family. So I typically in the afternoon run my car through the car wash. We've got one by our house. And older gentleman was there also with his wife, vacuuming out the car and said, "Welcome back. Glad to have you back. Hope Vegas was great." Yes, it was. First, thank you for listening. Every once in a while, you're reminded people listen. Usually it's the hate mail, but occasionally someone's very nice. I had a lot of fun. We'll get into it. Let me just deal with the elephant in the room before I get into all the stuff. We've got so much to talk about. I want to spend time on this topic later in the show, but I believe, I think I do need to address it out of the gate, the basics. It is true. Starting today, your prayers are appreciated. I will begin today doing 6 hours of radio nonstop. Now, I had been doing 5 hours. I was doing 9 to noon Eastern and then 4 to 6 Eastern with a 4-hour break between. So I could eat, go to the gym, do everything I needed to do, get the kids from school, come back, do 4 to 6 and be done. In fact, I have typically since 2009 when I was on CNN and doing evening shows, my workday has typically not ended until 7 o'clock, 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Starting today, my workday ends at 3 p.m., which is great. I don't know that I'll know what to do with myself. Rush Limbaugh one time told me when you hit 3 p.m., get a golf membership and go hit golf balls. Well, now I'm here, and unfortunately, he's not. And it is that unfortunate event that is causing this to happen. I will be doing 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 separate shows. This show 9 to noon. And then a local show in Atlanta on WSP Radio, noon to 3. Now, we've got about 20 affiliates for this program, and half of them are already running this show noon to 3. With, unfortunately, Rush's passing, Premier Radio has decided that they're going to keep airing essentially reruns of his show, DJs playing his voice on comments, which is I mean, if you love Rush Limbaugh, and I do, it's great, but there are audience metrics showing in some parts of the country that people are now starting to wonder what's next. Where is it going? And in Atlanta, the audience has shown that, particularly the younger audience, the one the advertisers love, that they're ready to move on. And unfortunately, I get to be kind of the turd in the punch bowl and be the guy who shows up noon to 3 when we would all prefer to listen to the other guy. Who's no longer around. And that now requires 6 hours of radio a day for me because I'm not giving up this show. Now, the goal, I think, is to get back to 3 hours. Half the affiliates of this program have already moved us noon to 3. It just seems like a logical fit there. I'm sure there will be lots of people out of the gate noon to 3 over time trying to fill a space that can't be filled. And let's just be honest about it. You can't replace Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh is the best that ever was and the best that will ever be. He was a friend of mine, a mentor who gave brilliant advice, and one of the funniest moments. And we've had so many conversations over the years, some by phone, mostly by email and text. And one of the funniest moments was me telling him, I'm going to do this. I actually ran the idea by him. And I said, look, I've never wanted to do national syndication, but I can't fill in for you right now. I want to do more than what I'm doing. Here's my idea. I said, honestly, I don't want to be national because, I mean, as long as you're around, I'll never even have a chance to be number one. And he said, don't worry about it. Even if I'm not around, you still won't be as good as me. And, honestly, that was very refreshing advice. Because it gives me license to be myself. I can't ever be him, so why do a bad impersonation of him? And I think there will be a lot of people who try to do bad impersonations of Rush to their detriment. And I'm just me. I may be a little more transparent, maybe more so than I should be, but I'm just me. And I never expected to be in radio, and now that I'm here, I can't imagine ever doing anything else. And it's all thanks to him. I wouldn't have taken this job, but for him telling me he'd never speak to me again if I didn't. He was a tremendous friend and mentor. And when I say friend, there are people who knew him way better than me, who spent way more time with him. We rarely ever visited in public. We got together rarely, but we did. But we talked a lot, and it's a tremendous honor to be in noon to 3 in the afternoons. But I'm not giving up on you guys, and I want you to understand this out of the gate. You guys are my audience. I have built the show from the ground up. I have been very blessed with a lot of radio stations that took a chance on me, and I don't want to let any of y'all down. And unfortunately, my Atlanta audience, where I got my start in radio, they get the last half of a 6-hour day. And I would love to be able to get everyone together noon to 3. And maybe that will happen if the good Lord's willing. And he's been very generous so far. Now, we've got to move on. I'll spend more time on this later, but we've got to move to the Atlanta shooting. This happened while I was out of town last week. We can talk about Vegas later. I don't gamble. I had a lot of fun in Vegas. I didn't gamble. I did not spend a penny in the casinos other than on food and drink. While I was gone, the Atlanta shooting happened. It was a young man in Atlanta. There's no reason to even mention the guy's name. A shooter shows up at Asian-themed massage parlors in Atlanta, and that is a relevant point. Opens fire, kills a number of people, and then heads south. He is caught, I believe, in Lowndes County in Valdosta on his way to Florida. And immediately the media pounced. This was white supremacy. Here's Joy Reid, the dim-witted host on MSNBC.
The worst thing that happened this week was a sheriff, a law enforcement officer of the United States, saying that a spree killer had a bad day because he has a sex addiction, and seeming to empathize with him when he slaughtered 8 women, most of them Asian. We need to recognize it's the violence against those bodies that is the outrage. Kirk Franklin was being a parent in whatever way he was being a parent. They will work that out internally. We need to work on this violence, and we need to know a really bad day is what those 8 families had when they lost their loved ones.
So she picked this up off of the internet. There's this guy, Aaron Rupar. I think he's one of the Vox kids, and he likes to selectively quote people to make them look bad. And the sheriff's deputy was quoting what the shooter himself said, that he was having a bad day. It wasn't the sheriff's deputy saying the guy had a bad day. It was the shooter says he had a bad day. The quote was from the shooter. And yet they want to cancel the sheriff's deputy for relaying the news. And of course, the president and vice president swooped into Atlanta to make sure the anti-Asian violence is stamped out.
Whatever the killer's motive, these facts are clear. 6 out of the 8 people killed on Tuesday night were of Asian descent. 7 were women. The shootings took place in businesses owned by Asian Americans. The shootings took place as violent hate crimes and discrimination against Asian Americans has risen dramatically over the last year. And
all right, let's listen to this in the bud. In 2016, Omar Mateen, a sympathizer to ISIS, walked into the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. It was a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Opened fire, killed 49 people. The media, without hesitation, rushed out of the gate to declare it a homophobic hate crime. He was attacking the gays. Therefore, it was a hate crime. It turns out that Omar Mateen was sympathetic to ISIS and chose to shoot up the nightclub, not because there were gay people there, but because it was a nightclub filled with freedom-loving Americans, and he wanted to stamp that out, pledging himself to ISIS. The media couldn't help themselves, though. They had to rush in with the narrative, the narrative first. And the same thing happened in Atlanta. We have a young man who stormed Asian massage parlors, gunned down mostly Asian women. Hate crime! Hate crime! Violence against Asians is on the rise. Did you know that the hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country are not being perpetuated mostly by white people? It's actually most of the Asian hate crime in this country comes from Northern California at the hands of young black men. Those are the facts. Don't hate me for pointing out the facts. That's the reality. This isn't white supremacy against Asians. It's actually non-white crime against the Asian American community. This was a white guy. Also, if there's one thing white supremacists tend to be, they tend to be honest about what they believe. What's his name? Derek Roof, who shot up the AME church in Charleston, wanted to start a race war. All the white supremacists are always very open about wanting to start a race war. And in this case, you've got young pervy shooter with a sex addiction and a porn addiction thrown out of his parents' house, blames the Asian massage parlors for it, can't get his happy ending, and decides to end their lives. Their lives. It had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with his sex addiction. And yet the media and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the Democrats can't help themselves. It's got to fit their prescripted narrative. Andrew Sullivan actually wrote about this in his latest piece, When the Narrative Replaces the News. The massacres at 3 massage parlors in the Atlanta area this week, leaving 8 human beings dead, others injured, and their families scarred, were horrifying. Read this deeply moving story. But this story is also deeply instructive about our national discourse and the state of the American mainstream and elite media. The story's coverage is proof, it seems, that American journalists have officially abandoned the habits of attempting any kind of objectivity in reporting these stories. We're now in the enlightened social justice world of moral clarity and narrative shaping. The media immediately had to seize on race because every story has to be told from an intersectional standpoint now. What is intersectionalism? Well, it comes from critical theory, and it believes that every individual is part of a group, and dominant groups are suppressive, moralistic, mean groups, and they oppose and oppress other groups, and we must elevate the oppressed over the oppressor. And this guy was white and a shooter and a Christian, and therefore he's from the most dominant group, therefore the most oppressive group, white male Christians. And so we must elevate the spa workers' stories over his, and that means we must tell it from a race angle, a white supremacy angle. Well, that was the beginning of the week. By the end of the week, it turns out, it really wasn't a white supremacy shooting. It was a Christian virgin shooting. That's what it was. The guy had pent up sexual frustration thanks to Christian sexual orthodoxy. We got to shut down the church now. At the beginning of the week, they were attacking white people. At the end of the week, they're attacking Christians. And in the minds of the media, it's the same thing. They can't help themselves. They cannot tell the truth. Now, here's the worst part about it. How many people do you think on the left believe that this shooting was racially motivated? I would venture to say an overwhelming majority of the people on the left believe that this shooting was racially motivated. Why? Because that was the media's first hot take out of the gate. White shooter must have been white supremacy. By the end of the week, it's Christians. And to the left, it doesn't matter. White supremacists, Christians, same thing. The New York Times running stories fairly explicitly, tying them together because they can't help themselves. Because they now don't put facts first. They put narrative first. And the narrative is every story has to have a victim and a victimizer, an oppressor and the oppressed. And the story the media tells must be from the victimizer against the victim and oppressed against the victimizer oppressor. And the easiest angle for the media to go with is race. You got a bunch of guilty white people. White guilt just runs rampant in the newsrooms of America today. And in penance, they run every story from a race angle. And unfortunately, the facts get left on the cutting room floor. But there's something else here too. There's another angle to the story that's got to be told, that can't be told. And if you tell it, you're going to get in major trouble for telling it. And I'm going to do that when we come back.
There's not my truth or your truth.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Yeah, I'm going to do this, and it may get me in trouble. There's a reason that the shooter in Atlanta shot up 3 Asian massage parlors and did not go to, well, there's an Asian American community in the Gwinnett County area. They didn't go there and shoot up a lot of people. He didn't go into any nail salons. He didn't go to Chinese restaurants. He went to spas. And the reason has nothing to do with white supremacy. The reason has to do with he had in his words, a sex addiction. And his roommate said he thought that those places were the safest place to have sex than other places. Now, what does all of this have to do with? I thought those were massage parlors. Are you shocked to find out there's gambling going on there? This gets buried in the conversation, except to the extent the media now wants to normalize this. Let me be clear here. I do not know the situation with these 3 massage parlors, but it is very common, particularly in the Southeast United States, within 30 minutes of a military installation, according to the Justice Department from a number of years ago, to have Asian-themed massage parlors that are, in fact, essentially houses of prostitution, where you get a massage and a sex act. I mean, the happy ending joke exists for a reason. And what's amazing here is that in the media's construct of things, let's pay no attention to that except the fact that let's treat it as Asian women do this. A buddy of mine actually was just emailing me this. He says, if you listen to the media coverage of this, Asian men are either human traffickers of Asian women or participating in houses of prostitution. It's the media can't help itself but frame these things in stereotypical bubbles. And then in this instance, ignore key facts so that they can paint a narrative based on race. It is overwhelmingly obvious, if you know anything about these places, whether, again, I don't know about these 3, but this guy sure seemed to think so. When I was on city council in Macon, I've told the story before, I'll give you the synopsis of it. We found that you have a high preponderance of places that are Asian-themed massage parlors, and they engage in sex acts. And oftentimes the women who work there are trafficked. And we should not allow the media to suddenly make heroes, generally, these places. We should not, and this is happening, allow them to suddenly legitimize sex work as if it's a run-of-the-mill thing. Well, Asian women got to work. I mean, that's essentially what you're hearing in parts of the media. And to stereotype and debase and degrade in that way to make them victims, we can't, in the media anymore, deal with just this one issue. We can't deal with the shooter shooting up 3 Asian massage parlors. In the media's mind, this has to be part of a larger narrative of sex workers and human trafficking and the like, and then paint with broad brushes the Asian American community in and of itself. How stereotypical is that within the media? The fact is, these places exist, and people pay for sex at many of them. I will never forget when I ran for city council, you drive down by my house, there was the Tokyo Spa. And then there was the Sunny Good Times Spa. There was, and all of them had various Asian themes. There are still some in the area. And everybody knows what's going on. And now suddenly the media wants to excuse all of that because a white dude who's clearly a racist shot the place up. Here's Andrew Sullivan on this. We should not take the killer's confession as definitive, but we can probe it, and indeed his story is backed up by acquaintances and friends and family. The New York Times originally ran one piece reporting this out. The Washington Post followed up with a piece citing contemporaneous evidence of the man's religious mania and sexual compulsion. It appears he frequented at least 2 of the spas he attacked. But let's pay no attention to what's going on there so we can paint a white supremacy story. So remember when the Trump administration, welcome back, by the way, it's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Remember when we had to believe the FBI? When the FBI, if you didn't believe the FBI, you were a white supremacist Trump supporter. For the last 4 years, the United States media has insisted that you must believe the FBI, and if you don't believe the FBI, you're a conspiracy theorist. If you don't believe the FBI, there's something wrong with you. Well, now, Raphael Warnock, the newest United States Senator from Georgia, he's calling BS on the FBI. Law enforcement officials, including the director of the FBI, have said the shootings in Atlanta, in which 8 people were killed, do not appear to have been racially motivated. But the Georgia Senator, Raphael Warnock, said on Sunday, "We all know hate when we see it." 6 women of Asian descent, including another woman and a man, were killed on Tuesday in shootings at spas in the Atlanta area. I'm not going to give the name of the shooter. 21-year-old white man was charged with the murders. He told police his actions were not racially motivated. He claimed a sex addiction. The FBI director for Christopher Wray, speaking to NPR, said, while the motive remains still under investigation at the moment, it does not appear that the motive was racially motivated, but such conclusions are rejected by protesters who see a link in rising attacks on Asian Americans in light of the coronavirus pandemic, which originated in China, and racially charged rhetoric from former President Donald Trump and others. Warnock, a Democrat, took office in January as the first African-American elected to the U.S. Senate from Georgia. On Saturday, he and fellow Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff spoke to protesters. He told NBC's Meet the Press, "I think it's important that we center the humanity of the victims. I'm hearing a lot about the shooter, but these precious lives have been lost. They are attached to families. They are connected to people who love them, and so we need to keep that in mind. Law enforcement will go through the work that they need to, but we all know hate when we see it, and it is tragic we've been visited with this kind of violence yet again." Now, wait just a minute. Of course, he wants gun reform, too. Let me read you. Where's the story here? Here's the headline in the Los Angeles Times. "I can't suffer in silence anymore. Demonstrators remain vigilant in protest against Asian American attacks." Maria Tran has felt the sting of anti-Asian racism before, including the time an older white gentleman on the street told me to go back to Vietnam, and the many references to the China virus by former President Trump. But the pain and outrage caused by last week's killings of 8 people in Georgia were too much for her to bear alone. On Sunday, she joined scores of others at a vigil and rally at Village Green Park in Garden Grove, California, to protest racially driven hate and violence. All right, just wait a minute. It wasn't a racially motivated shooting. It wasn't racially motivated. And yet these people all believe it to be so. Now, why is that? Well, let me get back to this piece from Andrew Sullivan. Listen to this. "We should not take the killer's confession as definitive, but we can probe it, and indeed his story is backed up by acquaintances and friends and family." The New York Times originally ran one piece reporting this out. The Washington Post followed up with one piece citing contemporaneous evidence of the man's religious mania and sexual compulsion. It appears that the man frequented at least 2 of the spas he attacked. He chose the spas, his ex-roommate said, because he thought they were safer than other ways to get easy sex. The New York Times ran a second piece, which confirmed the killer had indeed been in rehab for sexual impulses, was a religious fanatic, and his next target was going to be, quote, "a business tied to the pornography industry." We have yet to find any credible evidence of anti-Asian hatred or bigotry in the man's history. Maybe we will. We can't rule it out. But we do know that his roommates say they once asked him if he picked the spas for sex because the women were Asian, and they say he denied it, saying he thought the spas were just the safest way to have quick sex. That needs to be checked out more, but the only piece of evidence about possible anti-Asian bias points away, not towards it. And yet, well, you know what's coming. Accompanying one original piece of the known facts, the New York Times ran nine separate stories about the incident as part of the narrative that it was an anti-Asian hate crime fueled by white supremacy and or misogyny. Not to be outdone, the Washington Post ran 16 separate stories on the incident as anti-Asian white supremacy hate crimes. 16 stories. One story for the facts, 16 stories on how critical race theory would interpret the events regardless of the facts. For good measure, one of their columnists denounced reporting of law enforcement's version of events in the paper because it distracted attention from the real motives. Today, the New York Times ran yet another full-on critical theory piece disguised as news on how these murders are proof of structural racism and sexism because some activists say so. Margaret Sullivan. Listen to this. This is her headline. Not racially motivated? The Atlanta spa shootings show why the media should be wary of initial police statements. It's inevitable that reporters will have to rely heavily on law enforcement sources in the first hours after a horrific crime. Amid chaos and wild speculation, the police may be the only ones with any hard information at that point. But sometimes their information is flawed. Sometimes the way they tell it reflects a damaging bias. And so it was on Wednesday when Jay Baker, a captain with the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office in Georgia, described the motivations of the man killing 8 people, 6 of them Asian women. While hedging a bit, Baker told reporters there was no immediate reason to think the white shooter had a racist motivation. Why not? Well, because the suspect told the police. He apparently had an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places. This is where the media is. The police say, here's what he said. His roommates say, this fits his pattern. His parents say, we threw him out of the house for a sex addiction. By the way, he was in rehab for sex issues. He was going to these places because they're essentially service houses of prostitution for him to be able to get quick, easy access to sex, according to his roommates. But why should we believe him? Why should we believe his roommates? Why should we believe his family? Why should we believe the police? Let's believe what we want to believe because we have our truth. This is where postmodernism comes in here. There's no longer the truth, there's my truth. And my truth is that he's a white supremacist, anti-Asian bigot who committed anti-Asian violence because he's a white supremacist, Trump-supporting Christian. Facts be damned. You can't trust the media anymore. You can't, I mean, we've known this for a while. This isn't something new, but it continues to get worse. Every time you think maybe the media will finally realize they got a problem, well, like, no, let's double down. This is actually, this is an actual like media, a former ombudsman for the media, Margaret Sullivan. She was the New York Times public editor, and she's running a story saying, well, we've got to be careful about the initial police statements, not the initial media reaction. No, the initial police statements. Back to Andrew Sullivan. Mass killers, if they are motivated by bigotry or hate, tend to let the world know. The suspected attacker in Pittsburgh allegedly said he wanted to kill Jews while rampaging inside a synagogue. Police say the man charged with killing people at an El Paso Walmart told them he was targeting Mexicans, and the man who massacred black parishioners inside a Charleston church detailed his racist motivations at length. This mass murderer in Atlanta actually denied any such motive, and there's no evidence for it. And that was very true from the very start. And yet, here's an email forwarded that was sent to students and faculty at Harvard, which sums up the view of the elite. Many of us woke up yesterday to the horrific news of the vicious and deadly attack in Atlanta, the latest in a wave of increasing violence targeting the Asian American, and Pacific Islander community. The violence has a history, from Chinese exclusion to the nativist rhetoric amplified during the pandemic. Anti-Asian hostility has deep roots in American culture. And on it went. It's almost like they've got a script, and they use it for everything. But by the way, here's one of the things that gets missed, and I mentioned this earlier. Most of the anti-Asian violence in the United States that's being conducted right now, based on the evidence, is young black men. The rise in hate crime is actually pretty significant. Compared with black and Hispanic victims, Asian Americans have relatively higher chance to be victimized by non-white offenders, 25.5% versus 1% for African Americans, and 18.9% for Hispanics. Asian Americans have higher risk to be persecuted by strangers, are less likely to be offended in their residence, and are more likely to be targeted at schools or colleges. Of those committing violence against Asians, 24% of such attacks are committed by whites, 24% are committed by fellow Asians, 7% by Hispanics, and 27.5% by African Americans. So if white supremacist is the new domestic terrorism, and you know, the White House now wants us to believe that white supremacy is the real danger here in this country. That's what they want us to believe. You've got 24% of Asian violence committed by fellow Asians, 7% by Hispanics, and 27.5% by African Americans. More African Americans commit violence on Asian Americans than Asian Americans commit violence on Asian Americans. 24% of attacks on Asian Americans are committed by white people, 27.5% by African Americans, 24% by Asians. African Americans commit 23.9% of hate crimes despite being 13% of the population. That's just a data point. Is it racist to point it out? It shouldn't be. It's a fact. But yet you can't deal with the data anymore, because in the data they scream loudly about it. This is a problem with the white elite in this country. It is specifically a problem of the white elite. It is amplified by a story that came out last week in Time magazine. Time magazine has the story of the actor Elliot Page. Now, you may have never heard of the actor Elliot Page. The headline is Elliot Page is ready for this moment. Elliot Page doesn't remember exactly how long he's been asked. That's how it begins. Elliot Page, you see, was the star of the movie Juno. The problem is that if you look up the movie Juno, there's no Elliot Page to be found. It's Ellen Page. And Elliot Page is Ellen Page. But Ellen Page has now decided, and she, by the way, has a long history of issues. She's now decided she's a he. And so the media is rewriting the script. And you're no longer allowed to refer to Ellen Page as Ellen Page, or you might get shut down on social media. In fact, Twitter specifically has a policy against dead naming. Now, dead naming is woke speak for calling someone by their real name. If you call Bruce Jenner, Twitter will turn your account off because you've dead named. See, the theory among the woke white elite is that you've always been. Elliot Page always was. It's just we're only just now seeing it. The scales have fallen off our eyes. See, there's a religious narrative in wokeism. The scales have fallen off our eyes. We now see that Elliot Page always was. Pay no attention to the movie poster that said Ellen Page. CBS News' 60 Minutes is going to run a story on detransitioning. Trans members who walk away from the trans community and go back to being themselves, who they were. And 60 Minutes hasn't run the story, and they're already getting attacked. All of these stories, including the Atlanta shooting, have all of this in common. It's a moral panic of the white woke elite. They can no longer see the world as it is. They see the world through paradigms of intersectionality. And it prevents them from seeing the truth and allows them to grab hold of lies they call their truth. And when you point out that their truth is not the truth, they send the mob to silence you, including social media tech giants who will silence your account for daring to speak up. You know, everyone loves to talk about the story, the emperor has no clothes, in the media. Anyone who ever called out Donald Trump, oh, this is like the kid who cried, you've got no clothes on, to the emperor. Except the media is collaborating in post-birth abortion of any child who steps up to say the wokes have no clothes. If you step up and you say, wait a second, you're not Elliot Page, you're Ellen Page. You may have legally changed your name, but you're the girl from Juneau. Oh my gosh, kill that person, silence that person. We can't have that person speak that because that's not Elliot's truth. How am I supposed to know? You got to keep up with this stuff. And then they come full circle and they consume each other. The whole thing is horrific. This is where we are as a society. It is a mass delusion and a moral panic by the intellectual white elite of this country. And it is mostly, overwhelmingly, the white elite and a few others in this country, those who can profit off of it. All of these things tie together here. The world they see through an intersectional narrative lens. And if you're not part of the narrative, you're the bad person. It's not that they're crazy, it's that you're bad. No, actually, they are crazy. This is the world we live in, folks. It's only going to get worse. What do we do about it? Well, let's discuss that when we come back.
You're listening to The Erick Erickson Show.
Erick's daily email by texting show to 33777.
I have an email that I printed out to make sure I would have it. Anna Robeson wrote me to tell me that she got the Omaha Steaks package that I've been telling you people you should buy, and she loved it. She also said she did add the sliced chicken breasts and that they are definitely helpful. So you should be like Anna, be like me. You should go to omahasteaks.com. You should put Georgia, put Georgia in the search bar. And you will see a great deal from Omaha Steaks. It's their butcher's bestsellers. They've got the butcher's cut fillets. They got pork chops. They've got kielbasa sausage. They've got hamburgers. It's great. They've got caramel apple tart. My wife loves their caramel apple tartlets. She can't eat nutmeg. They don't have nutmeg. They're individually wrapped, so she can put one in the oven whenever she wants it to heat it up. Omaha Steaks has great stuff. And they don't just have the butcher's best sellers. Look on their website. They got poultry. They got seafood. You get shrimp. You get lobster. You can even get a brisket. I smoked a brisket from Omaha Steaks. OmahaSteaks.com. You put Georgia, the name of our state, put Georgia in the search bar. And you will see the butcher's best sellers, but check out everything else they have. Now, if you do get the butcher's best sellers, right now, they're going to send you an additional 4 free chicken breasts and 4 more burgers for free. That's a great deal. 4 chicken breasts, 4 burgers for free from Omaha Steaks if you take advantage of this deal. OmahaSteaks.com. You put Georgia in the search bar, and you will see it. Get this package. Get 4 free chicken breasts, 4 more burgers for free at omahasteaks.com. Now, to the phones we go. Joe up in LJ, you're going to be next. Welcome.
Eric, love your show, Eric. I just want to say I talked to Jody Heiss, Congressman Heiss.
Yeah.
And he had some very disturbing news I think you would like to know. I told him, I said, Jody, with a $30 trillion debt, what can we do about it? He said, Joe, we got to cut spending. And this is what's interesting. He said that both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have been spending too much money. And furthermore, the Republicans last week brought back earmarks. They voted to bring back pork barrel spending, Eric, and this is horrible. What do you think about that?
Yeah, Joe, seeing the Republicans cave on earmarks, I fought very hard. So did the late Senator Tom Coburn, who called them the gateway drug to get rid of them.
Right.
And Jody's been fighting that fight. Now, I just got an email while we're sitting here that Jody's going to run for Secretary of State here in Georgia.
I'll vote for him. I'll be for him. He's one of the best I've ever seen in my years in politics, Eric. I think Jody Heiss is one person I can count on to always put the taxpayers first. And
that is the truth.
There are not many we can count on to do that, Eric.
Yeah, Joe, listen, I appreciate the phone call. And look, I like Jody a lot. This is going to be an awkward situation. Speaking of, Brad Raffensperger is coming up at the top of the hour to talk about election reform, the Secretary of State. And I'm friends with Jody. I like him a lot. I will stay out of that race, I suppose. By the way, there's a rumor afoot that David Perdue may be eyeing challenging Brian Kemp. There's a rumor afoot. I don't know that that's true or not. I don't know that he would do it. I don't know. We'll see. But all sorts of rumor mills circulating. Who will the president find to challenge Governor Kemp in Georgia? One governor that I'm looking forward to interviewing here in the next few weeks is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who, man, the media hate that guy, and he's doing such a good job in Florida. He's now ruled out having a vaccine passport in the state of Florida. You're not going to have to carry around proof of vaccinations in Florida. And also, he is banning the study of critical theory in Florida schools. Given how screwed up the media is, it is well worth it to have him stand up and make this fight. The media, of course, is livid at him because, of course, they want you indoctrinated and they don't want to have to tell you the truth. They would rather be able to extrapolate hate crimes from things that aren't. So good for Ron DeSantis. When we come back, Brad Raffensperger talking about election reform. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. Glad to have you with me. The phone number, if you want to be part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Joining me by phone, the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, has a new piece in the American Enterprise Institute's National Affairs publication on the assault on trust in our elections. Secretary Raffensperger, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Eric.
So I read this piece the other day. It's kind of funny. I got the galley copy, and then I'm on the subscription list, so I got it in the mail as well, an advanced copy of it. And one of the things I appreciate very much about this piece is you spend a lot of time not just on what happened in 2020, but pointing out this is becoming a pattern, even going back to 2018, writing in the early morning hours of November 7, 2018, with 99% of precincts reporting. Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams was down by 68,000 votes. It was then that she stood before her supporters and declared she would not concede the election. Mainstream news outlets were soon echoing sporadic allegations from Abrams and her allies. This is just becoming a pattern in elections that the losing side says the election was stolen.
It has been for the last two election cycles, and our office has been front and center.
Yeah, it has. You've been attacked by both sides, and it's kind of funny to me, honestly, that right now you got a lot of Democrats who are singing your praises, and come election time, they're going to be just attacking you for everything. You're kind of the man in the middle with everyone throwing rocks at you right now.
Well, I understand that. I get to, one-on-one, the Democrats say nice things, and so I say to them, I did this morning. He says, well, can I take that as an endorsement with a big smile? And I can't. But at the end of the day, our job is to make sure we run fair and honest elections. It's as simple as that. Nothing more complicated.
Well, let's talk about that, which you get into some of this piece as well. There are numerous proposals floating out there right now on elections. I'm a big advocate of voter ID. You have made some suggestions on how we might be able to tie it to absentee ballots. And in fact, when I went through your website to get my absentee ballot this past year, I had to put in my driver's license number to be able to get it. It seems like there are ways that we can fix the process. There is no perfect process. And we're also in this weird situation where if we try to make any improvements to the integrity of the process, we're accused of suppressing the vote.
Well, unfortunately, that's true. I think that the online portal that was stood up and the current bills right now would have you put in your driver's license number with your day, month, year, so we know your birth date. I think that's one of the most secure ways of doing it. And both red states and blue states are doing it right now. In fact, one of the blue states is Minnesota. And so if Minnesota's doing it, why are the Democrats in the General Assembly opposing this bill? And obviously red states are doing it also. It just is a very rational and objective measure.
Now, let me ask you, one of the concerns that gets raised to me a lot is, these underfunded boards of elections. Like, I'm stunned by the number of thoughtful people I encounter on both sides who don't understand that in Georgia, the local boards of elections are funded by the counties, and you really don't have a lot of control over those local elections.
Correct. In fact, really, a lot of studies have shown over the years that one of the major problems that you have at the county level is that it's historically been underfunded. And so you have some election workers that are working really hard. They have what I call personal integrity, doing a great job, but they're always pushed on their budgets. And so they struggle with that, but they are doing a great job in spite of that.
So if you were king for a day, if you could snap your finger and improve the situation, what do you recommend to the legislature? What would you say could improve our election processes?
Well, I think photo ID for the absentee ballot process and using the driver's license really connects you to photo ID. So that's a great improvement for that process. And then I believe that at the end of the day, when you have a county election director that has, failed consistently, and you have a county that's been failing since 1993, that someone needs to have the authority to replace it. And unfortunately, what's before the General Assembly right now, I don't think that's really going to do the job. I think it really should be the Secretary of State, because I would fire Rick Barron if I was given the opportunity to do that. But be that as it may, Fulton County has hired him, fired him, hired him, fired him. They can't make that decision. And that's why sometimes you have to have someone that can make that decision. Florida's done it. and it really made improvements in some of their counties.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because I moved to Georgia to go to Mercer in 1993. I got involved in the College Republicans, became the state chairman of the College Republicans. I cannot recall a time since I've been in the state since 93 where Fulton County did not have irregularities on election night.
Right. Well, that's why this year, when we had all the irregularities in Fulton County in June, we ended up with that consent agreement. There's only been one consent agreement, by the way, but that was with us to be able to put a monitor in there. And we got very valuable information. They did improve the process, but they still have a long way to go. But the upshot of all that is what he saw was he did not see any ballot stuffing, any illegality, but he saw an awful lot of, just bad management practices. But those bad management practices lead to lack of confidence. The rest of Georgia is wondering what's going on there. Fortunately, there's no ballot stuffing, but we need to fix that and get competency up and down the line.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I realize you're in a tough spot. The president has come after you personally. I know my friend Congressman Heiss is announcing this morning he's going to run for Secretary of State and challenge you. You're kind of in a no-win situation, and yet at the same time, you're still in charge of the elections. That power is not being taken away from you. It's in the Constitution. How do you, in your position, try to reach out to the Republicans in the legislature and reinstill some confidence in the process when there's also been this organized campaign to try to undermine you personally?
We've had an awful lot of quiet conversations, really talking to the legislators, letting them know what would be solid improvements that we need to see. One of the challenges that we have in this office, though, and really every state will have, is federal laws. It's actually very interesting after the Trump election and all the questions that we had. Mo Brooks got on Fox News and he said, for the last 15 years, we've done nothing. And so, yes, Congressman, you're absolutely correct. And you ought to play that sometime. Because when we have the Republican House, Republican Senate, and Republican President, we didn't do any election reform. First thing that Nancy Pelosi did is she shoved H.R. 1 down the pike. It didn't go anywhere because we still controlled, the Senate. But now she came with H.R. 1 version 2.0. And they are obviously their vision of where elections should go, same-day registration, mail-in ballots, things like that. That's where the Democrat Party wants to take us. But they have really thought about their bill from the standpoint of the political side, not how do you actually run an election. And what they're doing is unworkable at the county level. And so we really need to have thoughtful, improvements, thoughtful reforms.
Yeah, it does seem like the Democratic solution here is just let's throw in all the things that we think will give us an advantage and tell the states you've got to implement these things without any real thought into how elections operate in states. That's one thing I've noticed in a lot of the national commentary is it's all been devoid of the actual day-to-day processes of local boards of election and what they actually do.
Exactly. One of the issues that the counties are having right now, particularly last year in a pandemic, but if you look at it, we have 15 days of voting during the week, and then we have obviously more weekend voting. So you're looking at probably about 19 days of early voting. Then you have a very strong absentee ballot program, and then you have election day. In effect, they're running 3 elections in that same cycle. It just creates a tremendous burden on the counties. And so you really need to think about how do you run elections, what works, and what is the most streamlined way of doing things so that everyone has an opportunity to vote, but also counties can manage that process.
Yeah, let me ask you about weekend voting, because I'm of the opinion that, and I realize the Democrats say it's voter suppression to curtail that, but it seems like these local boards of elections get worn out doing nonstop voting, including all the weekends in the run-up to the election, that maybe give them one weekend off seems like a solution to give them rest and ready for the election. But, I mean, what's your position on weekend voting?
Well, it definitely should finish up on that Friday before coming into the Tuesday. They need that time, those 3 days, to really prepare for the Tuesday election. The weekend voting has been in place. The challenge you have is the smaller counties really don't have a need for it, but you also want to have some uniformity in the process. And so I think that the General Assembly right now is still grinding through what does that look like. But the challenge you really have is originally some years ago, they had 6 weeks of early voting. Then they reduced it down to 3 weeks of early voting. And we really want to pick the right amount of time so that you can run the number of voters through that you're going to have in the large counties, but also not place such a huge burden on your smaller counties. And so we'll see where that ends up with. There's only 17 days, will be 19 days. But I think that'll be probably developed and answered sometime this week.
Now, one more question for you here on the early voting process. And my understanding is that Democrats, although publicly they're opposed to all the legislation, but behind the scenes have actually said they too agree that we need to curtail the number of days by which you can get in an absentee ballot just so we have time to process and count in the run-up to the election. I think there was bipartisan agreement for this 10-day cutoff before the election, which seems to me that it does make sense. You don't want people trying to get a mail-in ballot the Friday before the election.
Well, it's a good process. Many states are already doing that. But the idea that someone could request an absentee ballot the Friday before, they will never get to them. It's almost cruel to do that to a voter. And so if you have a process where you cut that off, that way it gives the counties the time that you can actually mail it back, and they can then return it back and get that in before election day. And so it really makes sure it really values the vote of everyone by making sure you have a process that works.
Well, and a process that works, I think, is the key here. You're right in this American Enterprise Institute piece. What we're witnessing is the culmination of many years of cynical attacks against the foundations of our democracy, attacks that have dangerously undermined America's faith in their electoral institutions. And it does seem like those attacks aren't going away, as both sides seem to be able to rally their bases with the idea that the other side is somehow not playing fair or stealing the election. And I mean, do you have any hope that we can fix this process here in Georgia?
Well, the challenge you have is you look at from Fair Fight, that's turned into a real moneymaker for her. She's raised over $100 million. So at the end of the day, why would she want to change? And so if they start doing that on the right side of the aisle, they could turn that into a moneymaker. We're going to see this played back and forth every election cycle, and eventually it's going to spread throughout the entire country.
Thanks so much for the optimistic take there. All right, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, thank you for stopping by. This was a great piece, well articulated in the AEI publication.
Thank you, Eric. Take care.
Absolutely, you too. This piece, it is the assault on trust in our elections. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in the National Affairs, which is published by AEI, and he spends a lot of time, and this is why I wanted to get him on here. Spends a lot of time outlining what Abrams did in 2018 that really began the process of sowing doubt in the elections in Georgia, and how the American media in particular ran with all of those doubts as if they were true, and utterly to dismiss them in 2020 with the president, and actually laid out the facts of what happened in Georgia. I'm still, for example, getting emails from people about vote fraud in Fulton County. In fact, there's a piece out today. I don't want to give the publication away, but basically saying that new evidence and new emails show that things were happening that were inappropriate and people were being dismissed, and the media didn't cover it. It's like, I covered it on my radio show. We had reporters on talking about this stuff, and yet this is something that both sides do now in this era of no longer the truth but my truth. There's no media outlet covered the fact that Fulton County was continuing to count ballots after 10:30 despite telling people to go home. Actually, I covered it on this program. So did multiple media outlets. I explained what was going on, but nobody cares about the truth anymore. Everybody just wants to be a professional victim these days on both sides of the aisle.
News and in-depth analysis.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. This hour of the program is brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan. They are in Noonan, Georgia. The Frost family, they've been active in conservative politics for years. Good Christian family. They've been doing First Liberty Building and Loan since 1993. They want to help small businesses become big businesses. If you need access to loans, capital, financing, creative strategies to get more financing, your bank's telling you no, First Liberty wants to help you get to yes. Go to firstlibertyga.com. Spend 5 minutes with them. See if you're a good fit. Now we're talking six-figure loans and up. We're not talking small change here. They handle big loans, and if you need one for your business, not personally, for your business, firstlibertyga.com is where you need to go. Firstlibertyga.com. I'm looking at the New York Times COVID tracker. The reason is because the state of New Jersey has announced they're going to cease their plan, slow down their plan to reopen schools because cases are going back up in New Jersey. In fact, cases in New Jersey have never really gone down. When you compare other states, New Jersey has been higher than most for some time. And what's so interesting is when you look at the data, where are cases high but going down? There are only 3 states, New York, Georgia, and Kentucky. And New York, like New Jersey, has way higher cases than other states, including Florida, where the media continues to vilify Ron DeSantis. They cannot deal honestly with Ron DeSantis. They can't deal honestly with what's happening in the Florida situation, which is unfortunate, but to be expected. Now, a number of states, cases are pretty low, which is good. Nevada, where I was last week, actually is doing very well. Arizona is doing very remarkably well. Arizona is one of the best in the nation right now. But Georgia, New York, and Kentucky are doing, as far as states that have had high cases and going down, doing well. Georgia's got to improve its vaccination rate. It is inexcusable. This is going to be a campaign issue against Brian Kemp in Georgia, is its vaccination rates are not good. And at some point, the state's just going to have to own it and do what they can. They're doing these mass vaccine sites around the state, but they got to do better. Now, all that being said, the fear factor out there in schools, I have a hard time relating to this. So was in Las Vegas last week. Do not gamble. I actually find Nevada, Las Vegas, to be highly relaxing, largely because I don't gamble. And I don't think I could have fun if I was out there losing money, going against the house. But I got a lot of restaurants that I like. And look, have y'all seen me? I like to eat. But shoot guns. There are remarkable places to go shoot guns. I went out to the desert in Arizona. There's a place out there. It's called Bullets and Burgers. They serve you hamburgers and you shoot guns. And I shot Barrett 50 caliber, and that sucker is amazing. It is the concussiveness of it more than the kick. The thing is so loud and so big, it's almost unwieldy to shoot. I shot 3 rounds. At that point, I wasn't even really aiming at anything, other than there were some down at the end of the trench. They dig a trench, because this thing, they were telling me that the Barrett is so powerful. There's a town 4 miles from where the range is, and that if the gun was pointed in the air, it could hit the town 4 miles away. Which is crazy. They were also telling me if you want to shoot a 50 caliber weapon, you can't do it within 50 miles of an airport. So there was a very specific location where this range could be with this Barrett. Also shot a lot of machine guns. Man, y'all, they had a machine gun out there. It was an M5 with a suppressor built in. That sucker, they made us take our ear protection off to fire this gun because it's so quiet. I mean, you can hear it, but it's like a car door shutting. It's crazy. And it was a machine gun. It was incredible. So I did that, and I took a helicopter flight. I landed in the Grand Canyon in an Indian reservation in an area that you can't get to even on mule, down into the canyon. You land out on this cliff that juts out into the canyon right over the Colorado River. It was remarkable. I highly recommend, if you can do it, go to Las Vegas and get the Grand Canyon helicopter tour. We used Maverick Air. There are a number of them out there. It's kind of funny. So we're at the gun range, and the range master asked us what helicopter company we're using. And he says, oh, good. Don't use this other one. They get way too close to the canyon wall. And then I had somebody reach out and say, if you need a helicopter ride, my brother's the head of this company that the range master said don't use. I was like, I'm not going to say anything. Won't give the name of that company. But the one I did use was Maverick Air. It literally landed in the Grand Canyon, came back into Las Vegas at sunset. It was gorgeous. Absolutely phenomenal. Didn't lose any money at the slots or anything like that because I don't gamble. But the restaurants were somewhat disappointing this time. Usually I eat at better restaurants, but they were all booked up because, man, the crowds have come back to Vegas. So, what do we do about the border situation? It's actually a studied contrast between those who are fair and those who are not. Let me read for you this from the Washington Post. This is four people in the Washington Post: Ashley Parker, Nick Miroff, Sean Sullivan, and Tyler Pager. Shortly before Christmas last year, Susan Rice and Jake Sullivan, two top advisors to President-elect Joe Biden, sat for an interview with EFE, a Spanish wire service, to issue a stark warning to migrants considering journeying north to the nation's southern border. Don't come now, but help is on the way. The next day, Biden was similarly pointed, saying his administration, while eager to roll back Donald Trump's immigration policies, first needed to implement guardrails to avoid winding up with 2 million people on our border. Less than a month later, the new president began tearing down some of the guardrails himself. He issued 5 immigration executive orders on Inauguration Day alone and promised an immigration policy far more humane and welcoming than that of his predecessor. His administration also began allowing unaccompanied minors into the country, a marked departure from the Trump administration's approach. Now the Biden administration is scrambling to control the biggest surge in 20 years, with the nation on pace for as many as 2 million migrants at the southern border this year, the outcome Biden said he wanted to avoid. Along with the existing struggle to combat the coronavirus, immigration has emerged as one of the administration's most urgent challenges, seized on by Republicans as a political cudgel. Republicans pounce, posing risks to Democrats in the 2022 midterms and potentially undermining Biden's governing agenda. The issue also threatens to overshadow the president's recent political victories in passing a $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package and making rapid strides in vaccine efforts. The situation of the border, which Biden and his advisors have steadfastly refused to call a crisis, is the result of an administration that was forewarned of the coming surge, yet still ill-prepared and lacking the capacity to deal with it. Administration officials have been plagued by muddled messaging, sometimes making appeals that seem directed more at liberal activists than the migrants they need to dissuade from coming to the country. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas says that actually the biggest threat to our homeland is this.
Before I let you go, just real quick, what happened in Atlanta, the killings, the murder of 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. Do you think that that is a hate crime?
Dana, the matter is under investigation. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of that tragic shooting. We are seeing a tremendous spike in hate crimes against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, as well as other communities. Domestic violent extremism is the most acute threat, terrorism-related threat that we are seeing to our homeland. And as President Biden so powerfully put it, words do matter. Leadership matters.
Domestic terrorism is the biggest threat we've got right now. That's right. Not the surge at the border. In fact, the Secretary of Homeland Security says this.
The Biden administration, though, is, as you mentioned, now allowing unaccompanied children into the U.S., different from the Trump administration. But clearly, you don't have the infrastructure to handle this many children right now. As I mentioned, more than 600 children have been in border protection custody for more than 10 days, far longer than is acceptable and allowed by law. That's 3 days. So did you change the policy too quickly without having the infrastructure in place to take care of these children?
Dana, we will not abandon our values and our principles. We will not abandon the needs of vulnerable children. That is what this is all about. We are executing on our plan. It does take time. It is difficult. Our plan includes the deployment of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA, to assist HHS in building its capacity more rapidly to shelter the children. But it is taking time and it is difficult because the entire system was dismantled by the prior administration. There was a system in place in both Republican and Democratic administrations that was torn down during the Trump administration, and that is why the challenge is more acute than it ever has been before.
So it's Donald Trump's fault that you guys signaled come on over and people came on over. It's all Donald Trump's fault. Now, Why wasn't this happening when Donald Trump was president if it's all his fault? It's a relevant question. It wasn't happening when he was there, and somehow it's his fault. How does this work? That ABC News interviewed with Martha Raddatz, an illegal alien. I'm sorry, an undocumented person. Except they're documented on camera. An illegal alien with Martha Raddatz. Listen to this.
This significant surge coming after President Biden ended Donald Trump's so-called Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait there for their court proceedings. Since then, many of those tent cities along the Mexican border have emptied out as people start streaming in. We were there when a bus of 56 asylum seekers arrived at Casa Alitas, a Catholic charity shelter in Tucson. Men, pregnant women, and children stepping off the bus with only what they could carry. This father, who asked that we not show his face, traveled to Mexico from Brazil with his wife and 3 young kids before crossing the border. Would you have tried to do this when Donald Trump was president?
Definitely not. Definitely. We had the chance, the same violence that's going on today was there last year. We used to watch the news, and I definitely won't do this.
So did you come here because Joe Biden was elected president?
Basically. The main thing was the violence in my country. And the second thing, I think, was Joe Biden. It's like lighting up my hope.
He came because of Joe Biden. This is, should we, do we not pay attention to the words of the illegal aliens? I mean, listen, this guy in the scale of intersectionality, now he is a man, so maybe we can't believe him because he's a man and not a woman, but he's a Hispanic illegal alien migrant. On the scale of intersectionality, I do believe we're supposed to take him at his truth. And his truth is, I wouldn't have come if Donald Trump were here, but now that Biden's here, I can come. Well, they're doing damage control for Biden over at CNN. Listen to this. Here's the headline. And you got 3 people here, Priscilla Alvarez, Jeremy Herb, and Jeremy Herb, and Jeremy Diamond. How the border problem caught the Biden team off guard and how they're scrambling to fix it. As the number of unaccompanied children in Border Patrol custody ballooned this month, President Joe Biden's team raced to find more places to house them, leaving thousands of children stuck in jail-like facilities for longer than the 72 hours allowed under the law. But the process of scouring government sites for adequate shelters was taking too long for Biden, who's now staring down a problem threatening to spiral out of control. He was disappointed that we hadn't gotten answers from other agencies faster, or that the facilities wouldn't be ready for children faster, said a senior administration official who spoke on condition of anonymity to offer a candid assessment of the response. He made it pretty clear that there were times when he didn't think we were moving fast enough. From its earliest weeks in office, the Biden administration has been playing catch-up, scrambling to stem a growing immigration crisis on the U.S. southern border, where there are now more than 14,000 unaccompanied children in U.S. custody. Republicans have assailed Biden. Republicans pounce! That's the story. Republicans pounce! Self-inflicted wounds, a Homeland Security official said. Interviews with more than 24 administration officials, people involved in the presidential transition, lawmakers, and congressional aides provide a look at how the gravity of the situation along the border began to sink in for the administration as it took power 2 months ago and how it struggled to address it. It's a heroic effort by the Biden administration. You know, what's so interesting here is you've got Chuck Todd and Chris Wallace both essentially calling out the Biden administration for not allowing journalists to go look-see. Now, here's the thing. When Donald Trump was president, he allowed the media to go look at these facilities. He allowed the media to go down there. You had Jim Acosta down there with practical priapism standing at the border all excited. Look, they're coming. They can get through the wall. Look, he didn't really secure it. Liar. He didn't build the wall. Bring him on. and then now, of course, he's not allowed to go. Here's Chuck Todd.
I want to put up a tweet from you visited the border yesterday. I believe it was in El Paso with a bipartisan group of senators, including Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut. And this is what he tweeted. I fought back tears as a 13-year-old sobbed uncontrollably, explaining through a translator how terrified she was, having been separated from her grandmother and without her parents. But he also said he saw overcrowded facility. And frankly, I guess my question is, why can he see it and not the American public, and certainly not the news media?
Ooh, and here's Chris Wallace.
So why has the Biden administration refused to allow reporters to see for themselves and to record what the conditions are under which these minors are being housed? Why, in fact, did you, when you went to the border on Friday and led a congressional delegation, why did you refuse to allow reporters to see the conditions under which these minors are being held?
Two things, Chris, if I may. Number one, let's not forget that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and we are focused on our operations, executing our operations in a crowded Border Patrol facility where hundreds of vulnerable migrant children are located, number one. And number two, we're working on providing footage so that the American public can see the Border Patrol stations. And I would encourage you and other reporters to see the facilities under the control of the Health and Human Services Department, where those children are sheltered and where they belong, and where we are moving them as quickly as possible.
Secretary Mayorkas, respectfully, sir, I think that there is a safe condition under which a pool reporter and a pool camera crew could go into some of these facilities. This has been going on for 2 months now, and record the conditions under which these minors are being held. It seems to me to say it's impossible to do because of COVID sounds like an excuse.
Chris, we're working on providing access so that individuals will be able to see what the conditions in a Border Patrol station are like. But first things first, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and we're focused on operations and executing on our plans. That's our highest priority. But we are providing for that access, and certainly reporters can see the Department of Health and Human Services facilities in which children are sheltered for a longer period of time.
Right. Well, a little more from Mayorkas. He made the rounds on the Sunday shows. This is Chuck Todd with calling out the Department of Homeland Security.
When you create a system that incentivizes people to come across and they are released, that immediately sends a message to Central America that if you come across, you can stay. I understand the on humanitarian grounds, the policy change on unaccompanied minors here. Are you concerned that a market efficiency has been created where folks have decided, look, my kid's got a shot at getting in the United States if I don't go with them?
Chuck, our message has been straightforward and simple. And it's true. The border is closed. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults. And we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children. I think we are executing on our plans. And quite frankly, when we are finished doing so, the American public will look back on this and say we secured our border and we upheld our values and our principles as a nation.
How can you say the border is closed if there is this, what some would look at as a loophole? And I understand on humanitarian grounds, but if the goal is to get these asylum seekers to seek the asylum in home country, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, for instance, how do you get them to do that if our policy is to let them in at the border?
So, Chuck, we have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, and a long-term plan, and the president and I have spoken to this repeatedly. Please remember something, that President Trump dismantled the orderly, humane, and efficient way of allowing children to make their claims under United States law in their home countries. He dismantled the Central American Minors Program. So we are rebuilding those orderly and safe processes as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, we will not expel into the Mexican desert, for example, 3 orphan children whom I saw over the last 2 weeks. We just won't do that.
Oh, he saw them. The rest of us aren't allowed to see them. This is really remarkable. I mean, this line that, well, we're undoing, Trump undid all these things. Well, yeah, he undid them and they couldn't come to the country. And you redid them and now the border's overwhelmed. By the way, we do have pictures this morning. They have removed the chain link fences and instead have everyone behind plastic. You know the big plastic tarps you put around your windows to insulate them in the winter if you can't afford good insulation? Yes, that's it. They've got these big sheets of plastic as the dividers and the kids are supposed to stay within. I remember these were concentration camps when Donald Trump was president. Situational ethics at its finest. They were concentration camps when Donald Trump was president, and now they're not, even though the conditions are just as bad. But they removed the chain link fence in favor of shipping containers and plastic barriers. Really remarkable how the media and the Democrats are willing to turn on this. But I got to give credit to Chris Wallace and Chuck Todd calling out the Homeland Security Secretary, saying essentially, even the Washington Post, that the Biden administration caused the problem. Can you believe Martha Raddatz was able to get an illegal alien to say he wouldn't have come here if Donald Trump were president? And they put it on the air. She's off to re-education camp this week, undoubtedly.
Honest news and conservative views.
Never separated from.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I want to spend a moment on it's a Georgia story that has national implications because a lot of states, not just Georgia, are looking at making some election reforms. One of the more reasonable election reforms, you know, the national media is running fear factor stories all over the nation. Georgia Republicans try to steal election. Georgia Republicans try to suppress black voters. Georgia Republicans try to do all sorts of, and they're expanding it nationwide. The making Georgia look all sorts of. The Fortune 500 has come out. The Metro Atlanta Chamber. How dare you clean up your election laws? One of the more reasonable proposals came from a state senator in Georgia. His name is John Albers. He represents the Roswell area. For those of you not in Georgia, Roswell is a little suburban bedroom community north of Atlanta with some great restaurants. And John Albers is a lawyer at a national law firm. And Albers' proposal is really freaking simple. Add a watermark to absentee ballots. One of the allegations was that people were photocopying absentee ballots, and those absentee ballots can be read by the scanners. So Albers has a very simple proposal. Watermark the absentee ballots so that they can't be photocopied. You have to have an original ballot. That's it. That's his proposal. He also signed on to a second proposal that would require that you put your driver's license number and birth date on your absentee ballot. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State for Georgia, was on my program and endorsed that measure. Put your driver's license number and birthday on your absentee ballot, require it. And Albers wants a watermark on the absentee ballot so it can't be photocopied. For this reasonable proposal for ballot integrity, by the way, something Democrats in the legislature support, the Lincoln Project has targeted Albers' law firm. They want Albers fired. Now, I am told, not by Albers, but by people who are friends of his, that it appears it may have worked, where he may be chased out of his job at a law firm that represents corporations against union activists. They may chase him from his job by bullying the Fortune 500 companies that are represented by this law firm, all for very reasonable ballot integrity reforms. They essentially have conflated John Albers to everyone else. Now, the lesson in this is very clear. Republicans nationwide have got to pass election reform measures. They've got to pass them, and I'm here to tell you that this has made up my mind that we should go with the Senate's more expansive reforms than the House's minimal reforms in Georgia. And we should do this nationwide. We should pass deep reform packages because you got to stand up to the bullies. And the way you stand up to the bullies is to fight back, punch them in the nose. And the way to punch them in the nose is to actually pass meaningful election reform that makes the Democrats mad. We're not talking unconstitutional stuff. They're going to call it voter suppression, and it's not. Like, for example, I interviewed the Secretary of State for Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, earlier in this program today. And one of the things he points out is that right now we do voting the Sunday before the election, the Saturday and Sunday before the election. That's inexcusable because the boards of elections need that weekend to, one, prepare for the actual election and also rest. And to hear the Democrats talk about it, the Democrats scream voter suppression. The Democrats say it's voter suppression if you deny working the Sunday before the election, when actually they need to rest and get ready for the main election. The Republicans in Georgia need to stand up to the bullies. They need to stand up to the Lincoln Project and the like. They need to advance meaningful election reform, and they need to go more expansively than what John Albers wanted to teach these guys a lesson. You come after the GOP for election reform, you're going to get what they promised and more. You got to stand up to these guys. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Glad to have you with me. Let's talk about some situational ethics. Situational ethics, means, it's very much like moral relativism. What's good for you may not be good for me. What's morally right in your situation may be morally abhorrent in my situation. What's ethical in one case, well, when it's me involved, it's not, or vice versa. The media and the Democrats have been in high dudgeon over January 6th. Now they're saying they're going to charge some of the people who stormed the Capitol with sedition against the United States. Some of them, it appears, probably should be. But what we've heard is you got to preserve our democracy. Forget us being a republic. You got to preserve the democracy. Preserve the democracy. The voters' will is predominant. We've got to fight for the voters. Well, that is until the Democrats can pad their House majority. See, there was a race in Iowa. It is the Iowa 2nd Congressional District. The winner there is Marionette Miller Meeks. She's a Republican. The Democrat's name is Rita Hart. And Marionette Miller Meeks won the race by 6 votes. Now, there were multiple recounts. There were lawsuits. The courts adjudicated the matter. The voters, it turns out, really did vote for Marionette Miller Meeks by 6 votes. The House of Representatives, the Democrat-led House of Representatives, is going to throw out that election. They've even brought in Mark Elias, the Democrats' super election lawyer. They're going to throw it out. It'll be the 4th time that the House of Representatives has thrown out a lawfully conducted election. It is solely to pad the margins of the House Democrats. According to Politico, a source says the effort to oust Miller Meeks in favor of Rita Hart has been blessed by the top echelons of House Democratic leadership, and the DCCC has brought in Mark Elias to make the case. That's it. The House wants to steal the election. Listen, what's so remarkable here is you had some Republicans willing to throw out the Electoral College to help the president, and now they're screaming. And you had all the Democrats saying, defend the election, defend democracy, and now they're saying, we're going to throw it out. Democrats said you had to respect state-certified elections. But if they throw out this election, they're throwing out a state-certified election. And they're perfectly fine to do with it. They're perfectly willing to throw out an election to add to their power. They are exactly what they said the Republicans were. This is very similar to the situation with the border. When Donald Trump was president of the United States, the Democrats said that they were concentration camps at the border. Now that Joe Biden is president, the situation's actually worse. The concentration camps are more crowded than they were under Donald Trump. And yet now suddenly they're not concentration camps because Biden has all the feels. Because Biden, his heart's in the right place, so they're not concentration camps. Amazing. I mean, essentially the Democrats are saying, if we had our own Hitler, we'd have been okay with it. I mean, that's where their moral relativism is coming in here. They were concentration camps because Donald Trump had bad motives. He wasn't killing the kids. He was actually sending them back to Mexico. That was so concentration camp-like. Remember when the Nazis sent the Jews back to Israel? This is where we are. The Democrats will throw out an election because they want to preserve their power. After all of the talk about defending democracy, after all of the talk about we've got to support state-funded elections, after all of the talk about defending democracy, the Democrats are perfectly willing to undermine a lawfully held election to preserve their power. That's what's going on here. It is situational ethics. All of you people who called and screamed and yelled about the Republicans undermining democracy, guess what? Your side is no better. Your side is no better. In fact, to some degree, your side is worse. Because with a presidential election, you're dealing not just with state elections, you're also dealing with an electoral college. It's more complex. There are constitutional issues. With this is a flat-out majority vote wins. And here, the majority vote winner is going to have her election thrown out because the Democrats want more power. They want more seats in the House. So yes, am I rubbing your nose in it? You're absolutely right, I am. Why? Because a lot of you people seem to think that you're better than the other side when the other side is Republicans, and yet you're actually throwing out a direct Democratic election. The Electoral College, the presidential vote, is not an elect Democratic election. The majority of the popular vote winner sometimes doesn't win, as happened in 2016. In House races, for time immemorial, the winner of the popular vote is the winner. And the winner of the popular vote is the Republican, but it was only by 6 votes. And so the Democrats are saying, oh, we got reasons. We got reasons. Never mind, it was adjudicated in court, and the court sided with the Republican. The state certified the election. No, to heck with democracy. To heck with the people's vote. It's all about power. It is always about power. The concentration camps are no longer concentration camps, even though they're worse. But Joe Biden's elected. And stealing democracy is bad if it might help Donald Trump, but if it helps Nancy Pelosi, why, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. All the smug Democrats who have been giving themselves chiropractic problems, reaching around, patting themselves on the back for defending democracy, are now about to disrupt democracy, and they don't care. Why? Because they never cared to begin with. It was all about power. It's also about power in how they censor and use the media to come after opponents. The media and the Democrats are of a playbook these days. They tell narratives, they tell stories, they don't necessarily tell facts, they don't necessarily tell truth. The shooting in Atlanta at the spas was not about a sex addiction and a crazy man. It was about white supremacy, even though it wasn't. Now there's this story. This is from the New York Times. Since 2013, Matt Bors has made a living as a left-leaning cartoonist on the internet. His site, The Nib, runs cartoons from him and other contributors that regularly skewer right-wing movements and conservatives with political commentary steeped in irony. One cartoon in December took aim at the Proud Boys, a far-right extremist group. With tongue planted firmly in cheek, Mr. Bors titled it "Boys Will Be Boys" and depicted a recruitment where new Proud Boys were trained to be stabby guys and to yell slurs at teenagers while playing video games. Days later, Facebook sent Mr. Bors a message saying that it had removed "Boys Will Be Boys" from his Facebook page for advocating violence and that he was on probation for violating its content policies. It wasn't the first time Facebook had dinged him. Now, you get this. This is the setup. Left-wing site that parodies the right, does cartoons. Facebook comes after him. Facebook bad. Well, you get all the way buried towards the bottom, and they've got to have the even-handedness here. And so they use the Babylon Bee. The New York Times, like CNN, hates the Babylon Bee because oftentimes it gets the news more accurate than CNN in the New York Times, and also gets a laugh out of people. Listen to how they characterize the Babylon Bee. Satire kept popping up as a blind spot for Facebook in 2019 and 2020. The site often dealt with far-right misinformation sites that used satire claims to protect their presence on the platform. For example, the Babylon Bee, a right-leaning site sometimes trafficked in misinformation under the guise of satire. I kid you not, that's how they describe it. Now, they linked to a piece back in October 11th of 2020 with one of their first big attacks on the Babylon Bee, saying that the Babylon Bee hasn't stopped making jokes at Mr. Trump's expense when they're sure to lose clicks and Twitter followers. One recent headline was Trump agrees to remove swimsuit competition from SCOTUS nomination process, but they're more apt to jab the other side. Like many conservative commentators who once expressed disbelief or outrage at Mr. Trump, the Bee has found those criticisms easy to set aside for the most part. What unifies writers and readers is stronger. Poking fun at the left. Oh, so that makes them a misinformation website. Now, Facebook has come after the Babylon Bee. Snopes, the fact checkers, Snopes, they come after the Babylon Bee, and CNN has. And the reason is not because they're peddling misinformation. The reason is because the Babylon Bee is consistently funnier and better able to capture the news than many of these sites. Let's see. I'm going to the Babylon Bee right now. Here's what their top headline: Progressive Christian hopes heaven will feature segregated spaces for every tribe, tongue, and nation. There's a quiz. What gender are you? Latest headlines: Biden visits southern border to play Despacito for migrant kids in cages. Despacito? I don't know. I'm too old. Happiest place on earth bans all expressions of happiness. New Snyder cut of the Bible contains over 47 deleted scenes. Putin challenges Biden to stair climbing contest. Instead of traditional warfare, Chinese military will now be trained to shout wrong pronouns at American troops. The Chinese military has announced they will no longer be investing in weapons, tanks, aircraft, or traditional warfare training techniques. Instead, the People's Liberation Army will simply be trained to shout the wrong pronouns at U.S. soldiers, who will collapse and shake uncontrollably at the advanced maneuver. Brave soldiers of the People's Liberation Army, prepare to launch a pronoun assault, cried one platoon leader in a training exercise. Go! The Chinese soldiers then began shouting he, him, and she, her at American soldiers whom Biden had loaned to the Chinese government for the practice session. They immediately collapsed to the floor. No! I'm a Caesar! It says so on my dog tags! Screamed one weeping American soldier huddled in the corner of the fetal position, rocking back and forth. You can't call me the wrong pronoun. It's literally violence. It's against the Geneva Convention, said another. And yet, see, the left is like, oh, the onion, it skewers the right. It's not misinformation. Essentially, what the left says is misinformation is any site with a sense of humor that pokes fun at the left. It's misinformation, according to the New York Times. See, but they got to get it in. They got to balance it somehow. They've got to make it balance. And so the balance is, well, this left-wing site, Facebook says is distributing misinformation, when really it's satire because it pokes fun at the right. The Babylon Bee, however, which pokes fun at the left, it's misinformation because it pokes fun at the left. The Babylon Bee actually pokes fun at pretty much everybody, including President Trump. And the New York Times did a multi-thousand-word profile of the Babylon Bee, seriously confused at how this site pokes fun at Donald Trump, but doesn't poke fun at Donald Trump, but does poke fun at Donald Trump, but doesn't poke fun at Donald Trump. They couldn't make up their mind in the story. And now they're accused of being a misinformation site that hides behind satire because it's satire the New York Times doesn't like. But they got to be even. They got to try to be even. When are we finally going to realize that the actual satire side is the New York Times? The New York Times itself is increasingly no longer a news organization. It is a woke progressive propaganda rag and goes after groups like the Babylon Bee, which do a better job of skewering people and covering the news than the New York Times does these days, because the Babylon Bee isn't interested in your truth or my truth, is interested in the truth, which makes them dangerous. I mean, the most dangerous people in America right now are the real truth tellers, the ones who can actually have a laugh at the expense of the idiots out there, which is what the Babylon Bee does on a daily basis. Therefore, they must be silenced.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show, the perfect
I'm here. I was tweeting. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I was replying to someone who's mad at me for pointing out the situational ethics of the Democrats. You know, speaking of situational ethics for the Democrats, have you heard about this Teen Vogue drama? That's right. They hired a woman, Alex McCammond. Remember, Alexa McCammond, she's 27. She was hired to be the editor of Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue is the most woke of all publications. Teen Vogue is really teen woke. It is trash, trash, trash. Alex McCammond, on her Twitter feed years ago, made comments that were purportedly anti-Asian. She tweeted these comments in 2011. Now Googling how to not wake up with swollen Asian eyes, she tweeted. She also referred to a stupid Asian TA in a tweet. These were 2011. Well, it turns out that was too much. Even though it was 2011, 10 years ago, it was too much for the woke writers of Teen Vogue. And they demanded she be fired. And Teen Vogue stood by her until they couldn't, and they pushed her out the door and said, "We're so sorry we hired this person who has repeatedly over the years apologized profusely for things that she said in 2011, 10 years ago." I mean, McCammond actually, she was dating the White House staffer who also had to leave, TJ, what's his name? But she was an established journalist. For some time, she's been an established journalist, hired by Teen Vogue, and they chased her off. And the woke who led the mob of Boko Haram is a writer named Christine DeWitt. Well, it turns out Christine DeWitt has her own problems. She's the senior social media manager at Teen Vogue, and she used the N-word more than once to white people. DeWitt says she's Irish and Filipino, and yet she used the N-word. And as we all know, you cannot use the N-word unless you are African American. You're not allowed. And even then, it's suspect. And this girl used it multiple times on social media and then led the woke mob to go after Alex McCammond, who I believe is black. And is this girl going to lose her job? Is this girl going to lose her job? Is the person who did this? Now, there's a backstory here. Apparently, the wokes are trying to use this to get after Anna Wintour. If you know who Anna Wintour is, she's the very famous editor of Vogue, who is now the chief content officer and global editorial director for Vogue and for Condé Nast. She oversees way more, and they don't like her because she's not woke enough for them. So they're out to get her. And the way to get her is to blame her for the original hiring of Alex McCammond. The whole thing is nuts, y'all. Here's the problem with Boko Haram. There's no grace in the secular religion, and the terrorist group that has come out of secularism, Boko Haram, the overwhelmingly white elite people who need Jesus and don't have him, they've decided that there's no such thing as grace anymore. That if you engage in anything and they can find 20-year-old problematic writing from you, you can be canceled unless you are sufficiently woke now. And that was Alex McCammond's problem. She may not be white, but she's dating a white dude. She was in a position of privilege and power and intersectionality. She ranks too high. And so the social media head of Teen Vogue decided to come after Alexa McCammond, and Boko Haram targeted her. And they annihilated her. They destroyed her career. That's what Boko Haram does. The only difference between Boko Haram and Boko Haram is death. They both want to destroy lives, and the rich elite whites in this country are getting really good at destroying the lives of people they disagree with.
7425.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you should like to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. It seems pretty clear where we're headed as a society is more disjointedness in coverage of news in ways that allows the media to perpetuate their critical theory coverage of the news. Now, I talk a lot about critical theory. You know, what is it? Vaughty Beecham or Bauckham, the minister, has a book coming out on critical theory. And his publisher almost didn't publish it, which is remarkable. The book is coming out. It's called Fault Lines. And it was one of those, I'm trying to figure out who is the publisher. It's getting really good reviews. Salem Books. Now, I don't know anything about Salem Books. And, interesting. Okay. It's an imprint of Regnery, and one of my books is there. So Salem Books is, that's interesting. That some publisher somewhere was thinking of balking on publishing his actual book, which is unfortunate. It appears, though, that it is going to be published, and maybe it was a different publisher that was thinking of not publishing his book. Now, my wife sent me a text on this a while back. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. We won a major victory when it was a Christian store. That's what it was. So the publisher was going to publish, but a Christian store was not going to put their book in it. Now, I doubt that it's Lifeway, because Lifeway has shut down all their stores. So I don't know what the Christian store would be, but there's a Christian store that nearly would not put Fault Lines in. Now, what is Fault Lines? Fault Lines is a book by Vaughty Bauckham on critical race theory. And he is a tremendous theologian. He is the father-in-law of a guy at Reformed Theological Seminary where I am in school, although I'm not taking classes right now. I'm going to have to get Vaughty on here to talk about this book. Now, what is critical theory? I talk about it a lot. You need to understand it, and I'm happy to walk through this repeatedly. Tim Keller, the theologian, has written a lot about critical theory and how harmful it is. It is a postmodernist idea. So let me begin, and I want to walk you through to get to where I'm going. Bear with me here. This will be our educational hour, our educational segment. For the longest time, I struggled to try to understand what is postmodernism as opposed to modernism. So let me give you what modernism is. Modernism believes that there can be an objective truth, that there is a real reality, and that we should accept things as true when given to us unless we have reason to believe they are not true. And the whole goal is to get to an actual objective truth. So when we hear a report in the media, our first reaction should be, this is probably true, but there may be things that aren't true therein. And perhaps we can question the sourcing. But we should presume initially that truth is truth, that what is reported is true, unless we get to the point where we know otherwise. Postmodernism is there's no such thing as truth, and there's no such thing as reality. Well, you and I look around. My reality is I'm in a studio right now, and I have lights on. I have a camera in front of me. I have a microphone in front of me, and this isn't my truth or your truth. This is the truth. This is the reality. But what postmodernism says is that our words define reality, that our reality is only as real as we choose to make it, and that we can change the wording. So, for example, The modernism would say the shooting in Atlanta was a depraved young man who had a sex addiction and porn addiction and was viewed these spas as temptation and sought to eliminate them as temptation from his life. That would be modernism. That would be the truth. What postmodernism says is we shouldn't take his word for it, nor should we take law enforcement's word for it. If we perceive it to be anti-Asian violence, then it is anti-Asian violence, because the truth of what happened is less important than my truth. And my truth is I perceive it as anti-Asian violence, therefore it's anti-Asian violence. Who cares what the actual motives were? Modernism means there's a truth, and we should only find ways then to undermine the truth if we are given those ways. Postmodernism is do not accept the truth, and we should presuppose ways to undermine the truth. Oftentimes where this comes about in theology is deconstructionism. You hear a lot about deconstructionism. With deconstructionism, we should presume that the gospel is telling us someone's truth, and it may not be our truth, and we should deconstruct around it. This is where we get to, even though the Bible is very explicit on sexual immorality and sexual ethics, we can get around it to conform it to our view, or we can show that it's not true and we can walk away from the faith. We deconstruct the faith away from the truth to our truth, and if our truth and the Bible's truth conflict, well, then it's not that the Bible is true, it's that the Bible is wrong and is painting a reality different from our own. I hope you're as confused as I am, because it's very confusing. This gets us then to critical theory. In critical theory, our words paint reality. And the words that paint the reality for everyone come from oppressors, and they use what's called dominant discourse. And the way to fight the oppressor is to change the words. And so we must get rid of free speech, and we must get rid of academic freedom, and we must get rid of the free market, because it is those tools by which the oppressors dominate us. So you must silence the oppressor. Now, who is the oppressor? Well, the entire world is viewed through intersectionality. Intersectionality is when all the demographic attributes of someone, namely their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their sexual orientation, and their gender combine. So if you are white, male, Christian, heterosexual, cisgendered, meaning you are super straight, well, then you're the most oppressive. And if you're none of those things, you are the least oppressed, or you are the most oppressed. And if you are the most oppressed, you have greater truth than the person who is most oppressive. So the oppressed can speak louder and with more moral clarity. And if you are an oppressor, even if you're an expert on something, you're not allowed to speak about it because you're an oppressor. So if you are a white male astronaut and you are confronted with a black female transgender non-astronaut who believes we did not land on the moon because they saw a video on the internet that shows it, well, their truth needs to be given preference. So the truth of us landing on the moon, forget the conspiracy theorists of it. If you're a white male who believes that we did not land on the moon, your truth is irrelevant to the astronaut who experienced it. But the astronaut who experienced it, his truth is irrelevant to the black female transgender person who believes we did land on the moon. Her morality is dominant. Her truth must therefore be dominant. So the facts no longer matter. What matters is what this person perceives. This is where we are in postmodernism. You see this all the time. You see this, frankly, on the left and the right. How many people listening to me right now have sent me videos of someone they saw on the internet who shows the election was stolen? It doesn't matter that the election wasn't stolen, and it doesn't matter what the facts are, because that person perceives it and seeks to discredit anyone who says otherwise. Their truth reigns supreme. And if you agree with it, well, it's your truth as well. And your truth matters way more than the actual facts. This is now coming home to roost in anti-racism. The New York Times highlighting Ibram Kendi. Now, Ibram Kendi is a far-left radical anti-capitalist who believes that you can't just be against racism, you must be anti-racist. And part of being anti-racist is it must be painful and you must be required to give something up through reparations or otherwise, or you're not really committed to it. Well, now the New York Times is praising him moving on, not just to racial justice, but to anti-racist news. Ben Smith writing this. Ibram Kendi and Bina Venkataraman met last summer when their big Boston institutions, Boston University and the Boston Globe, were grappling with protests over racial justice. Mr. Venkataraman, the editor of the Globe's editorial page, asked Dr. Kendi, the author of the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, why he decided to found the Center for Anti-Racist Research in a city known for the backlash to busing and where sports fans boo athletes of color, she recalled. They started talking about their shared obsession with a different Boston history, 19th century abolitionist newspapers. Then they wondered what it would mean to found in 2021 a newspaper in the spirit of William Lloyd Garrison's legendary The Liberator. In particular, they wondered, what would it mean to bring to American racism the sense of urgency with which Garrison in 1831 started the newspaper, abandoning a more gradualist approach to slavery? On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No, no, he famously began, saying that would be like telling a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Now, with the backing of their institutions and a 7-figure budget, they plan later this year to start an online publication that blends reportage, opinion, and academic research, some of which will appear in the Globe. They hope to revive the tradition of a generation of media that predates the formal division of news and opinion in 20th century American journalism, and they want to channel the energy that has produced a year of newsroom conversations and arguments about racism. They're going to essentially announce racism is everywhere and in everything, and we're going to cover it as if it is so. Wow. They're going to get 7 figures from woke white guilt to shame everyone and make it into academic institutions and in mainstream newspapers. Have you noticed that there are a whole lot of people who claim to be oppressed who profit from the claims? And a whole lot of people who they claim to be oppressors who are in worse situations than they. It's remarkable the grifters that come out in this stuff. And they're going to get 7 figures to cover this. And they're going to get praised by newsrooms around the country. But what is remarkable to me is this line from Ben Smith in the New York Times that they essentially want to go back to a time when there were no divisions between news and editorial. Don't we have that now? Is Ben Smith the last person in the New York Times who doesn't realize the New York Times itself has broken the wall between editorial and news? This is where we're headed, folks. The intersectionalists are coming for all of us. And they're going to shake us down, and they're going to embrace critical theory. Kudos to people like Ron DeSantis in Florida who have decided critical theory has no place in the classroom. All it does is it creates a professional class of victim to shake down other people. And they've captured the Fortune 500, which is increasingly in on this. Look at the Fortune 500 in Atlanta, Georgia. The Metro Chamber of Commerce in Atlanta, Georgia has come out against any voting reform measure, no matter how innocuous. They don't want it because they claim it will suppress the vote, to require that people who have to show their driver's license show up at the polls suddenly have to write it down on their absentee ballot. They leave no turn unstoned in their effort. No turn unstoned in their effort to claim victimization. This is where we are as a country. And you know the way to stand up and fight back? It's to stand up and talk about how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs these people are. It's to talk about the actual truth, not your truth and my truth. That is why those of us on the right, and you need to wrap your brain around this, that is why all of us on the right have an obligation to actual truth. It's why we need to do a better job of making sure we know the facts. It's why we need to not just believe the video we see on the internet that confirms our biases, but to make sure it's actually true. Because these people are coming with lies they're going to package as truth and claim you're a racist if you don't believe it. And the only way to stand up to them is to stand up and know the actual truth and call them out. Because the truth will overcome the lie every time.
News and in-depth analysis from Erick
Well, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, especially mine. Me. I mentioned this at the beginning of the program. I am about to do 3 more hours of radio. And for the next little while, we'll be doing this every weekday. It's why I took off last week to rest up for it. I don't know how long my energy will hold out. The sad reality is that Rush Limbaugh has passed away. Premier Radio, which is Rush's syndicator, has decided to continue playing essentially best ofs of Rush, where they have people jockey his DJ his voice. And I think they'll be able to do that for a while because Rush is Rush. He is the best and will always be the best. There are some markets, however, where they're seeing in audience research that their demographic, the sad fact is in radio, the only demographic they really care about are 25 to 54-year-olds. And the 25 to 54-year-olds in some markets are starting to get ready for something else. And my market in Atlanta, where I've been the host of Evening Drive Time for a decade, is one of those. And I'm very flattered and a little bit overwhelmed that they asked me to be the guy to replace Rush in that market. Rush can't really ever be replaced. I'll just be in that slot. And that gives rise to a question of, what about this show? I don't plan on leaving you guys. I would like to think that one day maybe I can combine the shows. That's my hope. If I can, I will. And that may, unfortunately, in some situations, like, for example, Westwood One, which is the syndicator for Cumulus, is launching Dan Bongino. Now, they essentially made it sound like Bongino is Rush's replacement, which is not so. There are several people out there. I know my friend Dana Lash also has a show noon to 3, and I'll be doing noon to 3 in Atlanta. And I would like to move everybody together. About half the stations that air this program are already airing at noon to 3, so it kind of makes sense. I don't know, though. God's in control. He's got this. If I move to noon to 3, I suspect probably in markets where Bongino has to be aired, I will either be in delay or not on the air. Unfortunately, as much, and that may be my own home station. I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. I don't think 6 hours of radio is sustainable long term. I do 5 hours right now, or up until Friday. I did 5 hours, 3 in the morning and then 2 in the afternoon with 4 hours in between. Now, the craziest absurd thing here is that since 2009, when I got hired at CNN, I have never not worked until 7 o'clock at night. When I was with CNN, I was with John King USA, and then as a commentator when they wound that show down, and was typically on until 7 o'clock at night. And with radio, I was at first, my hours were originally 5 to 7 and then 4 to 6 evening drive time in Atlanta. And it's the most listened to station in the nation for talk radio. And 4 to 6 was the largest audience, but not the most prestigious audience. And so I'll be taking a bit of an audience hit moving to noon to 3, but in the most prestigious 3 hours of radio. And the reason 12 to 3 is the biggest 3 hours of radio is because your lunchtime on the East Coast and your morning drive time on the West Coast. So you capture all of the major demands there. So it's very flattering and humbling, but I know I'm going to be exhausted. Your prayers are appreciated. On the upside, for you guys, you'll get my first 3 hours. They'll get essentially my last 3 hours. And I'm trying to figure out for this show, as I do want to grow this into a nationally syndicated show, where to find the balance between covering Georgia and the nation. There are times, like the Atlanta spa story, that it is a national story, even though it's Georgia, or the Georgia reform, election reforms. They're national stories. I think there are ways for me to still talk about Georgia while making it a national show. I know in reaching out to some program directors around the country, a couple of them said, well, it sounds so Georgia focused. Well, yeah, it has, because we're only on Georgia stations. As we grow the footprint of the show, that will become less, but I will commit to you to still talk about Georgia in ways that can relate to a national audience. I've done that filling in for Neil Bortz and Herman Cain in the past on WSB in Atlanta. But these are interesting times in radio because Rush Limbaugh has been such a dominant force in radio. The thing that I don't want to do is to try to appear ghoulish. The man has died, and he was a mentor to me. And I don't think it's appropriate to try to rush in and say, well, I'm the next. There will never be a next Rush Limbaugh. No one will ever be the next Rush Limbaugh. I just ask to my audience that you guys show me a little grace as I try to navigate the next little while of doing 6 hours of radio a day. I know I have people, because y'all tell me that you listen to me all 5 hours in a day. I don't know how anyone can listen to my voice that long. I appreciate it that you do. I love y'all for doing it. But to some degree, I'm going to have to do the noontime show as a repeat of this show because I don't have time to show prep in between like I used to do. But we will navigate all of this moving forward together. And I will try to do my best to balance everything. And I hope that I'll be able to keep all the stations if I am able to change things up and consolidate into one show. I want all of you to go with me. Some it'll be easier than others, I realize, but I hope to be able to work with all of you. And there's always ErickEricksonShow.com where you can live stream the show. But we will do this all over again tomorrow. And here on out, the new norm for me will be 6 nonstop hours of radio. So I'm leaving y'all. The switch will flip, and I'll go over to Atlanta. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.